Okay, we have started now, visually. Right, so as I was saying, my name is Diana. I have been working in not-for-profit since 2005. What I'm doing here is what I thought, according to our conversations with Ala, what UNCN could profit from. It will go fast, I'm not gonna lie. But do not worry if you do not capture everything. Just write down what you want to know, like I said, and ask me later. This is more about you catching on what works for you, what you think might work for you. Just cherry pick what resonates with you and make your own agenda. There is not one right solution, and we will still have some Q&A time at the end. Even if you don't have time, you can always ask me to meet. I will stay extra for those who have the time and the interest. And mute yourselves, please. If you want to keep your cameras on, that's up to you, but I will turn off mine because I find it a little bit more distracting to have my camera on. Please do raise your hands to participate. And we have planned breaks in between to go get water, get tea, get coffee. So hopefully they have been well timed and you will have enough space to stretch your legs. Right, so this is part of a series of workshops. Hold on, give me a minute. This is part of a series of workshops that we have planned, in which we will talk about in this particular day today. It's gonna be a crash course on humanitarian work. So it's gonna get you up to date with, you know, what it is, what that we do, what is, you know, a humanitarian response, why the UN. Then next session, which will be December 1st, we'll talk about donors, how to profile them, how to find them, how to research them, etc. If anyone wants to help the professional fundraiser with information, you're more than welcome to contribute into the agenda. We will also talk on December 8th about project proposals. On December 15, we will talk about specifically about fundraising, making fundraising plans. And then on the 22nd, we will talk about social media marketing and community-based marketing. And then on the 29th, we will talk about grant writing, grant proposals, and business sponsorship. Before this time, sorry, at the end of this series, we will support you with one package for grants application. So let me see if I can find it here at the end. The idea is that you will get something like, something like this, which is a funding opportunity where you get a professional to do, you know, choose 3 reliable grants, and then to, you know, help you with the writing of the grant proposal. That would be based on one of the projects that, you know, come out of this series of workshops. And so give it your best. We hope we can honor you and support you on your quest to get those grants, especially for those who are struggling to pay the operational costs. Today we will talk about the phases of disaster recovery and the Ukrainian war. We will talk about the UN and humanitarian response, which will be a lot. I'm not gonna lie, but at the same time, I'm gonna make it very briskly, and you don't have to understand everything, so long as you know where to find this and go back and check the papers when you need them, you know, check the presentation when you need it. It's more for you to be aware, as it were. And then we will close with where to find funds, and very briefly, you know, oversight of how other organizations are getting funds and etc. Right, so I'm gonna start first with the phases of disaster recovery. Now, these phases of disaster recovery are phases that happen naturally. They just happen in every disaster. We have to be mindful here that each disaster is a unique event that requires careful assessment. Many people will call this different ways, many agencies will call this different way, but the fundamental elements and contexts are the same. And you will see as well how familiar they are with other crises that you have supported, if you haven't heard of this before. These phases happen whether we are here or not. And our role as humanitarians is to reduce the impact and to support populations through them so that they recover better and faster. So people will continue to recover and exist, whether we're here or not, and we're just here to support them. However, because of that, the phases have sort of like different lengths. So it's not like one phase is exactly 3 weeks and a half, because each emergency is different, each crisis is different, the nature of the emergency, the magnitude, the access to the affected people, the resources locally, the preparedness, all of these will define how long each phase lasts. Yeah. And so my request is going to be, so I'm going to copy all the information from the chat, if you don't mind me. And okay, I think I got it all. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all now to contribute in the chat what you think is going to be the needs that the populations experience at this time. Oh, I cannot copy paste it. Ala, could you please copy paste the chat in another document so that we can access it afterwards? Because if it erases, then we lose all the information. Would that be possible?
Yep, working on it.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully. So I'm gonna try as well the download button, but we have had times where you know, if you leave out the room or something, it happens, you lose all the information that is there. So I just want to make sure that we're ready for that. Right. So first, the first phase of disaster recovery is the search and rescue, which happens immediately to a few weeks. So this phase is, you know, you first want to get people out. That's your first priority, getting people out and getting them to safety. The needs for this phase are transport, first aid, are physical protection, communications, and information, yeah, basic support during the journey. If anyone knows any other needs that might come during this search and rescue phase, please write them in the chat. And then after this comes the emergency relief. The emergency relief, once you have had people, taken people out into a safe place, they will have to, they have needs, and you have to meet their basic needs to keep them alive. So food, water, shelter, medicines, and those with severe injuries need urgent medical help. This phase can last as well immediately to a few months, depending on you know, how accessible the people are, how you know, how continuous the flow is of people, because you have some crises where, you know, people continues to flow through time. And then we move to early recovery. And early recovery lasts a few weeks to months or years. And this is the recovery phase when systems are in place, so people are no longer worried about survival, but they start to kind of rebuild their lives, and they have a place to get food and water, temporary or transitional shelter that can withstand wind with a rain. It's a little bit more, you know, stable, so people start to transition to a sort of new normal. What you will see here is that children start to go back to school, though the classes may be held, for example, in a church or in a tent or some other temporary accommodation. And those affected may not yet have recovered fully, but they have begun to adapt. And so their needs are going to be resources, skills, shelter, protection, and advocacy. And of course, you know, continue with the provision of aid, water, food, etc. Then we move to medium to long-term recovery. And medium to long-term recovery is can take about months to years. This is where the work of, like, you start to see that some of those temporary structures start to become permanent physical structures. Like they start to replace tents, trailers, or plywood houses. And they start to restore as well social structures, because when people are gone, in a crisis, this is lost, and so people start to rebuild this again, like the social networks and the shops, and you start to see an infrastructure that starts to, the social fabric of communities start to be built, it starts to strengthen. Children return to school buildings, and you can see as well that adults have renewed opportunities to improve their livelihoods and restore their families' economies. Life is finally beginning to feel stable once more. And again, like I said, they might need stuff to build, some economic support, some startup support, advocacy, and protection for specific vulnerabilities within the population. And they will need more, capacity building for businesses and for political tools. And then we see, there we go. And then we have community development and disaster risk reduction, which lasts years to decades. Now, this is not part of the is not part of the emergency response, because it's not anymore an emergency. However, it makes part of, it should always be our goal, to keep in mind the Build Back Better, using the crisis to increase resilience, for example. Community development is a means of improving the new normal on the normal. And this is where, for example, the UN development goals, which I will explain about later, like eradicating poverty, providing universal education, saving lives of mothers and children from preventable diseases, take place. And so I'm showing you this because what we see is, this is a tale as old as ancient Rome. Refugee camps and settlements of today are the cities of tomorrow. And so what you see here is Atari camp, which already exists for about 10, 15 years. And it has already gone through all of these phases, and people are still struggling in some ways. But what you see here is a city already in full functioning. Are there any questions so far? Okay, right. So I would say, if you can write or think for yourself, which of these phases is your organization currently active in? So in which of these phases is your organization providing support? And perhaps in which of these phases does your organization wishes to become active? Yeah.
Could you show the slide with the
Oh, yes, sorry.
phases, please?
Yes, sorry. So what we see is a lot of the organizations that came to Ukraine, and actually in every crisis, I would say, initially are focused on search and rescue and emergency relief. And it is always a little bit of a struggle for them to move on to early recovery. I would say that I've seen amazing stuff happen in this transition. And so I would say that's what I live for, to see these little organizations that started moving people to progress. And in the end, I've seen them, for example, set up camps, entire camps, which is massive. I think that, again, that's something that I think it's very beneficial, because we have knowledge and we have networks and we have resources. There is a certain privilege about being a foreign in a crisis, where you can have so much advocacy power and bring so many resources, right? Okay, I'm reading here in the chat. Amazing. Amazing. Yes. Yes. So this, what I'm showing today, is entirely humanitarian, and I will explain what I mean by that later. But yeah, all of it, I think it's quite useful. What happens as well, what we see is that there's different stakeholders and different people enter in different moments of this crisis. So in the search and rescue, first the first responders, direct neighbors, organizations who expected something like this to happen, jump in the action. Then when emergency relief happens, all of those same actors are involved, but then a wider section of society and new activists also become active. Those who say, oh, I have money in my account, I can send money, or those who say, oh, I have time, I can join. Those people who say, oh, I have water, or I have a pulses in my house, I can donate, they become active, right? And so there's a huge influx here of aid. And then we move on to early recovery. And then what happens is INGOs who have been trying to get their paper ready, because their assessments take somewhere between 3 weeks to 6 weeks, to 8 weeks, finally have their assessments done, and they can now jump and support. So INGOs join in, and they, start to provide humanitarian assistance through UN partners. So UN starts to provide assistance through them. Then what we see in the medium to long-term recovery is that the new community-based organizations, the government and UN partners are the most salient ones. And I would say a few of your organizations are going to be active in this phase as well. And then when we move to community development and disaster risk reduction, which takes years, really the burden of the continued development lies on businesses and experienced community-based organizations, the government, UN partners and contractors of UN, disaster risk reduction organizations, first responders who, are doing this, making sure that, this doesn't happen again, the education system, etc., etc. That's brilliant, Josie, because it takes a more complete approach to providing aid when you have the oversight of all of that, but also having access to all of these phases actually helps an organization remain financially viable. Because what happens is, if you are just doing emergency relief, when this phase is over, your budget is also over. You will struggle to find funding to continue to do something that is in the head of donors unjustifiable. What it looks like is like this. Now, and this is, again, please keep in mind, every crisis is unique. But what we see usually is, I have tried my best drawing skills to draw these two lines. One of them represents individual donations from individuals, and the big one represents funds, grants and big funds. So what we see is that during the search and rescue and the emergency relief, there's quite a big wave of donations, because it's in the news and because people see it every day and it's outrage. It's very emotional. People donate emotionally. Then as the crisis continues, people start to get desensitized. Oh, is the war still happening? Yeah, I have had that said to me about 3 weeks ago. And so people stop caring, or stop, realize that they cannot help much more than they have, and they continue with their life. Meanwhile, your organizations are still in the thick of it and still struggling for those funds. But that's good because, sorry, not good. That's right on time with the UN funds, because the UN funds take such a long time to procure that during the first 6 or 8 months maybe of the crisis happening, they are struggling, and then eventually they get all their shit together and start to fund. And so they start to flood the humanitarian work with their funds. And so these funds actually last a little longer. They are a little bit more consistent over the years. And eventually, when the medium to long-term recovery finishes, UN actually implements an exit strategy where they make sure that the local populations are self-sustained, and that they have, it's a whole thing. They say, okay, the crisis is now finishing. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to start our exit strategy, and we progress to development. And so then other organizations of the UN will take over. Are there any questions? Okay. So let me move. Right. So we're moving to the first break. And I wanted you to also consider these, very general knowledge of the crisis, phases of the crisis, specifically for the Ukrainian context. So now we could take, if we could take 5 minutes, just please consider during this time, what are the phases that you think are in the Ukrainian war, and what do you think will define this new phase of the war? All right. And I'm going to, hold on. I'm going to give you all then 5 minutes now. Right. Just wanted to ask if anyone has any questions so far.
Yeah, just a quick one, because I'm wondering, like, in cases where the conflicts linger, it seems like the phases, do they move back? Like, for example, we see all of a sudden there's an increase in attacks, and maybe people are donating more, it's back in the news. Like, do the phases ever go back?
Yeah. So because each conflict is different, but also each community is different. And all the same, the news has a big impact on what's happening here. And like the official agendas as well, for example, from UNICEF and their promotional like posters, I would say that yes, it can shift. It's not like such a linear thing. I think yes, it is a linear thing, but not when you see it in the big picture. I would say especially.
I would like to.
Yes, Roman?
Yeah, no. I would like to ask, I have some thoughts about amount of this support that like many NGO help and US help. And I think that sometimes they, very, very often, they give so little support, so small support, so not enough for, it's not change making, it's like something to help. For example, now we are in Warsaw, and here is my 17 years old brother. So he's here because of the war, yeah. And here is really a lack of support from government or some organizations or something like this. He tried to find his work, but it's also not enough. So, and because he's just 17 years old, and so on. So I mean that the question is why the support is so small and not sustainable. not always the same, but okay, in some cases it could be. So this is the question.
Oh, I agree with Amy. Like there's some disasters like this. So I think charity is the proof of failure of the government. I think that if the government works, charity is not necessary, right? Because the government provides for people. But because the government is not providing for people, then charities have to jump in. That's where the UN comes in place. However, like you said, it's kind of like the support that people can get is the bare minimum that is sort of, you know, a sustainable for them to provide, not for the person to receive. And so it's very difficult to imagine that you have all of a sudden a whole country that needs help, you know, a whole country that becomes unemployed. And this happened as well in Syria. Now you look at it from that side, from the side of a Ukrainian. I think from the side of a Syrian that is not able to work. Sorry, guys. That is not able to work. Syrians, they couldn't work, they couldn't pass through, and even when they did, they couldn't get any, like the bare minimum was something like 200 per month. And this was something that for me marked the reason why a lot of organizations were doing what they were doing during the refugee crisis, because we knew that they didn't have other support than us. We still have that in some other crises that are still happening. And what we see with the Ukrainians is that, in fact, the crisis has been reduced because the Ukrainians have been allowed to work abroad. The Ukrainians have been allowed to have support from the government, have been allowed to be received by friends and families and others that could host them. And this has sort of like reduced the burden that the UN could carry. But again, there's so much that they can do. It's a pool of resources, and there's 5 crises happening at the same time all over the world. And so I think, you know, it's about celebrating the little wins. And I think this is a little win, believe it or not. Sorry, my opinions are mine. I must clarify, they're not Help People's opinion. Help People might differ from what I say. Right. So what do you consider the phases of the Ukrainian war to be? Anyone has any idea or has read anything? Because I know that you guys are, a few of you have a background in military and intel, and so I don't want to be the one to deliver the news.
I guess it is the last and one before. So 2 phases that we have. Some of them will be for decades. Some of them will for like years. So it depends on direction.
Yeah. So according to some pieces, like from Al Jazeera, for example, there are a few phases. The big war started then in 2014, but really it's been like passive until now. And now we consider this sort of like a new phase of the conflict. Lubomir, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that we're very much in the very first phase of the war because of how it's being conducted. I think the only thing that distinguishes the current time from the very first months is that the Ukrainian military has been successful at stopping further advances by the Russian army. So it does appear, and I don't want to jinx anything, but it does appear that the Russian army will not be able to push much further than the current line of contact. However, as we know from a couple of days ago, missiles are still being shot at infrastructure all over Ukraine, which means that a lot of Ukrainians are suffering from the lack of water, electricity, and heat. So we are still very much in the first phase, as I see it from that perspective. Also, as we all believe and hope, the Ukrainian army will push back the contact line even further, then more of the territories that were occupied will then be freed. But that also means that then Ukraine will be able to provide humanitarian assistance to people that are in a very bad state, such as we've seen in Kherson, such as we've seen in the other areas near Kharkiv that were freed a month ago. And so that too will be very much similar to the first phase when the disaster has happened, which is the rescue mission. So I think that is going to be an ongoing state for as long as there are Russian troops on in the territories of Ukraine, and as long as they don't give up. So unfortunately, we're going to be in the first phase for a long time.
Yeah, so what you mentioned is quite critical. I think, yes, we have a very complex environment in Ukraine, which is some parts, like in Lviv, people have already started early reconstruction. And you see it as well happening in Kiev, where the cities are already being rebuilt and whatnot. And meanwhile, somewhere else, the conflict is just basically starting. So we are going to have to cope with those sort of like two different sides of the spectrum in the help that we can provide. I think it is as well critical that, you know, we are going to be working with the military if we are working in the front line. And what that means is this gray area between humanitarian aid and military aid that is very peculiar in Ukraine, because what happened in Ukraine is that everybody could flee, but the people that stayed were the people that were going to help win the war. And so we have, for example, hospitals at some point had 80% of the people they were treating were army. And there are civilian hospitals for which we had to fundraise and get donations and get like equipment stuff. And this is civilian aid that we know is going to go to help military personnel. And I think, you know, this kind of like very hazy line is going to continue to happen. And it is going to be even more intensified as the conflict progresses, because like somebody said, oh, why are you guys trying to evacuate people from occupied territories if all the people in occupied territories are all sympathizers of Russians? And so what happens is it becomes a little bit more political and a little bit more, you know, military, and it's kind of like very complex environment in that sense. Am I making any sense?
Well, I have to tell you, I haven't heard the argument that you just made.
Oh, I heard it. I had it.
Have
I
you?
had it
Yeah.
in my face. Yeah, when I was there.
That's unfortunate, because I think, as Kherson has demonstrated, people in the occupied territories are not sympathizers of the Putin project.
So I agree with you. I actually ended up having a huge discussion with this person who was also an aid provider. And I said, look, you are the person, like we are evacuating, Help People is evacuating people from occupied territories. And most of the people we evacuate are disabled, elderly, who had to stay over to take care of someone who was even older than them and who was bedridden. And so it was a little bit more of a burden to transport them during the wartime. And so now that, you know, like they had to, or they managed to. And even then we struggled to convince a lot of them. And it wasn't about taking one side or the other, but it was about really the cost that it has for people to evacuate. So yeah,
I think there's also a certain difference in the slides that you presented, or the phases that you presented. It was clearly, there we go. It does appear very much focused. I shouldn't say it's focused on, but it does lend itself very well to a natural disaster. Some of it also lends itself to the context of a human-made disaster, such as war and hostilities. But in this particular case, when you made the distinction between military and civilian, of course, there are quite a lot of people who are strongly motivated to help the armed forces prevail and push back the Russian invading forces, so that the humanitarian disaster is reduced, and so that villages and buildings could be rebuilt, so that we don't have the permanent state, as you have in the last phase there, of permanently established refugee camps. So
we're going to continue. This is a very interesting topic that I'm going to touch specifically in this next part. Sorry. Right. So when we talk about humanitarian aid, we have to talk about the UN and its history. And why is because the UN was born in 1945 after the Second World War, with the aim of preventing future world wars. It is an intergovernmental organization that focuses in maintaining peace and also providing aid. Sorry, I'm gonna, for those who want to really read the detailed description and all the BS that's written in the PowerPoint, you have the PowerPoint. If you don't have it, send me an email. But the UN objectives are maintaining international peace and security, protecting human rights, delivering humanitarian aid, promoting sustainable development, and upholding international law. Now, they might not do many things well, but the one thing that they do is once all of this is over, they are going to still be in Ukraine. And it's the same thing happening in Iraq and the same thing happening in Afghanistan. You know, once everything is done and people are not coming anymore, volunteers are not coming anymore, money is not coming anymore, they are still going to be here, which is what they can afford to be so difficult to work with, because at some points they are the only alternative for getting support in humanitarian projects and humanitarian work. Now, they were born to uphold humanitarian rights. So, human rights. So human rights, inalienable fundamental rights that every person have. Let me see if I can share this picture with you. Sorry, I don't think I can. But right, so these rights, I'm gonna try and send you, or maybe Ala, could you take from the PowerPoint, from the PDF that I sent, this particular picture and the next picture and put it on the chat, if possible?
Okay, I will try to do that.
Thank you. So what we have is, again, the human rights. They were created to prevent the horrors of Nazism and genocide. And what happened is that next, in the change of the millennium, the UN decided, or the governments together decided, oh, but that's not enough. We don't want to just strive to protect basic human rights. We also want to strive to be better and do better, and in a way that is more sustainable. So they created the UN or Millennium Sustainable Development Goals, with no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality of education for all, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. You can read it on the screen. And so what this means is, whatever work we are doing, we are supporting either one of those human rights or several, or the sustainable development goals. Why is this important? This is important because when you fundraise for humanitarian causes, you will be asked about this. You will have to use your human rights advocacy to say, this is why we're doing it. For example, for those working with evacuations, right? There is one human right that says that you have the right to travel. Where is it? You can travel wherever you want, for example, or you should be free from persecution and whatnot. So there are going to be several that you support. Now, my question to you is, if you can, look at this. I don't know if it's too small. Let me know. I had hope that I could. Let me see if I can close this. That I could cope that picture in the chat. Okay, hold on, let me see. Maybe I can still do it.
You may change size. You see, downside.
Yeah.
Downside. That.
Sorry, what?
No, the downsize. Yeah, like this.
So maybe give it a little bit of thought, maybe 2 minutes, and just drop in the chat what of these rights do you think your organization is supporting? Because this will help you create a narrative for your donors. I'm also gonna write. Oh, thank you, Alan. So the Ala has shared the pictures for those who wish to just check it on, your own time. Right. So for example, if I may talk about help people, we help with evacuations, and we also have released some prisoners. So we supported, no one has the right to torture you. You are equal before the law and are entitled to equal protection. You have the right to seek legal help, because a lot of the people that were kidnapped were not, supported legally. And, we also, because released them, then we supported that nobody can be imprisoned or forced you to leave your country. The right
It help,
trial, yes.
could it help to find something for humanitarian aid? Because what I see here is a bit different. It's, I guess no one is good enough, because it's not the right social security and from the government, because it's not from the government. We do it from volunteers, from donors.
Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I have asked it.
So yes and no. These are the universal human rights. I cannot change them. No one can change them. They are useful in their own right. And again, whether you believe in them or not, this is what you're going to be requested from big funds, for example, to be able to justify some of your work. Now, a lot of yes.
Yeah, let me just comment very quickly. Everyone here, I think, is familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of values and principles. And to tell you the truth, we are at the very lowest rank of Maslow's needs, just survival. And I think that most of the aid agencies that are currently most active in Ukraine are working at the level of the very first layer of Maslow's hierarchy of values, which is, how do these people survive the winter when there's no water, electricity, heat, and when bombs are falling all around, and when their homes have been destroyed?
Yeah.
So the talk about the other human rights is at a much higher level of Maslow's hierarchy. We're not there. We're not even close.
Right. So I wanted to share this with you for that very same reason.
Okay.
So that we understand, hold on, let me put the presentation. So that we understand to which extent, yeah, there we go. To which extent, then, even if it's just that one right, we can have an impact. And so that we can present that to donors, etc., right? The reason being that whatever we say, whatever we do in our marketing, communication, and PR should be bringing that perspective from our beneficiaries and bridging that with the perspective of our donors. You cannot go to donors and say, we want cars, because no one's going to give you cars. What you want to say is, we need to evacuate these people and you want to do something, so we're going to connect you both. That's how you effectively fundraise, by reflecting both the narratives of the persons and reflecting both the narratives of the donors. Yes, Josie?
I just have a quick question. What's the distinction between advocating for advocating for these rights and putting activities in place that advocate for these rights versus directly supporting an activity, for example, that removes somebody from a place of torture or releases somebody from slavery? So when we're coming in with mental health crisis and trauma care, we're advocating for the right to the things like, in disaster, leisure from work is not really a high priority, but we're advocating for a recognition of rhythms of rest and restoration that are vital necessity for ongoing survival. So we're advocating for that right, but we're not necessarily putting practices into place that directly allow for that to happen. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I think that the big difference is in the way in which you might be perceived as urgent versus the way you might not be. So advocating, basically, it's perceived publicly as less urgent. Whereas if you're doing something, it's because it has to be done, right? But that's just the way I see it. Maybe John has a different answer. Please, John.
Hi, I just want to chime in very briefly on that. And I get the point with Maslow's hierarchy and such. And as much disdain as I have for the concept of public relations at times, it is about the messaging. Because when we're supporting evacs, when we're supporting counter human trafficking, we're also supporting these rights inherently. So as much as I dislike it when it comes to trying to keep the focus of donors after donor fatigue sets in, if it's messaging, I think being flexible with the concept of how you present it, as long as it's honest and true, is the idea to keep in mind.
Thank you, John.
One thing I just want to add with that, I think that's so important what John just said. As far as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there is value in assessing that. Actually, the bigger picture is a lot of Maslow's perspective as ongoing research has actually undermined some of his research and debunked it, and highlighted the need for human safety as a core component and meeting it holistically. So psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically, which many of the organizations, if not most of those organizations on this call, contribute in some way to that. And that's an ongoing aspect of actually meeting a lot of these rights that are listed under the UN Charter.
Yeah, I totally understand as well. This is so fluffy and up in the air. I'm a very physical, concrete person, which is why we're here. I was hoping we wouldn't go into this discussion so deeply, but understandably, it's very airy and fluffy and in the air. And like you said, we have immediate needs right now. And so this feels kind of distracting. It feels like unnecessary. Just understand how this connects to your work, and that's it. Because one day this might be useful. One day a donor will come and ask you, okay, but what are you up to? And then you have this narrative, because that's what I hope you get from this, that narrative of these people's rights are being violated and we are helping them like this, and you can support that. That's it. That's all that there is for it. Are there any questions? Right. So the same thing with the Sustainable Development Goals, unless you go into project proposal and probably just start to work more on the development side. So phases 3 and 4, you will not have much to do with it. It's just important that you know they exist and that you can fetch them whenever you need for a donor or whatever. Yeah. Exactly. It's also part of the UN language. It's definitely part of the UN language. You might think, they are just decorative human rights, but no, there's people that actually guides their work through them. which is why I asked the question about which human rights is your organization supporting and which development goals is your organization supporting, because this will help you communicate that. That is right. It also levels the ground for everybody that is going to work as well with like the UN. Right, so talking about the UN, in order to be able to do their big thing, they are big and complex, and you don't have to learn any of these, you don't have to know any of these by heart, other than the General Assembly sets out the agenda, and then you have the secretariat with help, which helps, and then you have other bodies that support. Now, the General Assembly, there will be some names you will come across, like the UNDP, the UNICEF World Food Program, or WFP, the UNFPA and the UNHCR are not like organizations you will have to come across, and they all have their own unique mandates. And the one that is so far now coordinating the most in Ukraine is the UN OCHA in the Secretariat, which is the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Now, why this happens is that in the General Assembly, the way we see it in the humanitarian sector, UNHCR focuses on displaced people abroad, refugees. Inside of the country, we don't call them refugees, although they are colloquially known as internal refugees. What we talk about are internally displaced people. So if you see IDP somewhere, it means internally displaced people. Now, the UNHCR deals with refugees, but not with IDPs. The other organizations and the OCHA deals with them. So not the OCHA, the other organizations like the World Food Program and this and that, and the OCHA coordinates. So again, know that this is here if you ever need it. And we can take a break. Are there any questions so far? Hold on, let me see. Oh,
I
yeah.
know that there are difference between recovery, like disaster phase, and development phase. So
Yes.
previously in Ukraine was development programs. Now we have, I don't know how it called, disaster or like
so humanitarian response in disaster relief. Yes.
yeah.
So when there's no disaster, usually the UN has development, is focused on development, and then all
UNDP, yes.
Yes. So
UNDP responsible for that, or some other organization. So, and by the way, UNDP is the one of these organization, or it's a central organization, for example.
Yes.
So you say OCHA coordinate all of this, or just monitoring all of this.
So
it's different.
OCHA coordinates the humanitarian response. The development response is coordinated by the UNDP. Hold on, let me put it back. There we go. So let me see if I can zoom in. Oh, Jordi. Sorry, guys, my cat woke up, and he always wakes up when I'm in the middle of trainings to sing their songs.
He feels the break is coming.
Yeah. Let me see if I end the show. Yes, there we go. So you have here in the Secretariat, the UNDP, which is the United Nations Development Program, which focuses on developing countries and communities and all that. But you also have then the Population Fund, which focuses on some specific areas of that, like connecting with like education and whatnot. Then you have the World Food Program, which also focuses on food security. You have also the project services, which basically is just if they want to create like overhaul their education system, or if they want to set up a big library for the country, whatever, I don't know, that's where it comes. But can everybody see my screen still, by the way? Yeah. So we have the here in the Secretariat, we have the Office for Humanitarian Affairs, Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs. So within Ukraine, they are the big ones that coordinate what is happening now. I reckon that the UNDP will also be involved in certain level, but I think that their role is secondary for now. And eventually, once the crisis subsides, we will likely see more active participation of them. And then there's also, I wanted to say, the specific bodies, the specialized agencies like UNESCO, and there are others who are focused on here. The UN Women, for example, falls on the falls on the General Assembly. However, they are not necessarily focused on funds and programs. They are just a very specialized UN organization. Okay, so how are we doing with time? Did everybody, yeah? Did you
I
break?
have a question if you don't know.
Yeah, no, go on.
Does each of them have their own budget that they may like grant budget? I mean, that they may share with NGOs and with charity foundations, or not all of them? And the question is, should we just apply for grants, or also to knock the doors before, like when there are no grant calls, for example?
Right. So you don't wanna, you do and you don't. So you do want to, but I must tell you not to do that. Knock the doors of UN. The reason being that if you are friends and you get a contract, it's going to be seen as proselytism, and it's going to be seen as nepotism. And the UN people are they protect themselves a lot against this. So they don't want to have friends that will come and ask them, favors and whatnot. However, yes, you get contracts if you're known, if they know your work, if they know your if they know the kind of the quality of the work that you do, etc. You can apply. You get better. You get told, for example, oh, we're gonna open a new grant. Would you please apply to it? And although you will be judged, it's it's likely someone is going to. I would say just by the fact of being in this circle, you already are developing yourself and therefore putting your best foot forward. Now, the people selecting the project are likely not going to be your direct person, so you still have to be good. And if you're not good and you get it, there's going to be a lot of questions asked, and there's a whole rating I will explain about later on how to get these sort of grants. Yes, Josie?
Yes, I just have a quick question. Maybe I'll cover this at a future point, but I think one of the challenges that many of the NGOs on this call face is that we are small enough, and it's so helpful to see all the relationships. We don't even qualify to apply. I mean, for the UHF funding, you've got a minimum $200,000 a year budget that you have to have established over the past year. Several NGOs didn't even launch till the start of the war. UN funding is a minimum $2 million a year. So your only option is to come under as a sub-partner under a organization that qualifies for grant funding at that level. And I think that's a roadblock that many of us who are involved in Ukraine continue to hit over and over and over again, is that all these top dogs that are getting all the funding, and yet there's many grassroots organizations that are doing more impactful, flexible work on the ground, yet we can't access these dollars.
Yes, so that is a major complaint that I guess all of us have. We are helping on board some organizations, small organizations. I would say even if it's you don't fulfill some requirements, still apply if it's not too much effort. In fact, we have been in the Ukrainian Humanitarian Fund meeting, Q&A, and both my counterpart, Ukrainian counterpart, and myself attended each language session. And the Ukrainians were told that they are by design not being considered because of the fact that they are not big dogs, you know. And we were in this other meeting in English where I was asking the same questions, and they were saying, unfortunately, because of the risk management, you would have to go through, you know, become a sub-partner organization. Now, I'm going to explain all of this later to everybody, but we are trying to find ways around this, and hopefully, you know, because of the localization agenda, which is something that it's happened in 2014 in the Great Bargain. Because of it, hopefully they're going to start more and more easy the requirements. So even if you don't have like the 2-year 2 million budget that they request, you know, that you prove, you still could apply and you could still be elected under a higher risk level. But we'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, just a follow-up point. We applied for the UHF funding and jumped through all the hoops only to be told you have to be registered in country and you have to have the $200,000 budget. You don't qualify in any category, medium risk or high risk, if you don't have those two pieces. And unfortunately, they didn't tell us that at the beginning. So we went through 6 months of process and submission of paperwork only to find that out. So yeah, those pieces would be really helpful to know, and to maybe what's going to happen to overcome some of those roadblocks.
So these roadblocks still exist, and I'm not gonna lie, we in Help People are struggling with them. We have one person that is helping us though, so I might be able to get you in touch. However, yes, I would say the road is always better if you try and do a sub-partnering. And I know that some organizations are looking for this sort of support, psychosocial support that they could provide, they wish to provide, but they know how to access it, but they don't have the manpower to do this. Then you can always just partner. Yeah. But we're now going to talk about core humanitarian principles. Has anyone heard about this before? Just raise your hand, because I don't want to be explaining something that is nonsense. Okay. All right. So I see quite a few of us haven't heard this before, so I'm going to give you a small detailed account of it. So because, again, we have the UN, human rights, and then, you know, be able to provide humanitarian support, they realized that we were working with people in vulnerable situations, people, you know, you have all kinds of aid that could be provided, and in different qualities and in different, you know, it could be a situation where there's a lot of abuse that can happen. So they decided, okay, we're going to create the humanitarian principles, which are principles, 4 principles actually. I wrote 5 because there's one thing that I wanted to mention specifically, but there are 4 principles. The 4 principles are humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence, which I translated as do no harm, treat with dignity and respect, do not discriminate, do not be political, and remain neutral in a conflict. Yes, they do this because the humanitarian crises are, again, like you could through your aid, it's just such a situation where people depend on you that it could be, you know, borrowed for abuse. So it could allow for abuse. And the idea was to prevent that. Now I'm going to give some examples of how this looks like in practice. Yes, so let's talk about the cases, which we already have sort of discussed a little bit in the previous slides. But imagine that there's a food distribution in the church, right? So in order to respect the humanitarian principles, how would we have to do them? How would we have to distribute food in a church and still, you know, respect the humanitarian principles? Who wants to give an opinion?
mean, it certainly doesn't violate any of the principles. There, you can openly distribute, anybody can access it, I guess within a particular area, and it's not pushing any political or any other opinion.
There are
I
situations though. Yes.
I think that church is looks like political. That's why they are ready to help to people, but not in a church, like just in civic places.
Okay, now I'm gonna give you an example, Alan. Last year in Colombia, we were helping feed people, right? And so we sent food to an organization or volunteers. And then when we had another organization come in and participate, they let us know that this organization was distributing this food only to those people that would go and listen to the sermon in their church. Right? In which ways is this then violating the humanitarian principles?
Discrimination.
Yeah. Discrimination because it's basically just choosing people that believes, but also it's also not treating people with dignity and respect because they are having to do something for the food. Yeah. And all the same, it is not political or religious because people are being, you know, this food is being used to captivate more attendees in the church. Yeah. Now think about another distribution that we had in Italy. In Italy, in Como, during the refugee crisis, there were 500 people sleeping in a park, and they didn't have food, they didn't have water, they didn't have a kitchen in the ground, and we tried to open a kitchen, but it wasn't possible. The locals tried to open a kitchen, and it wasn't possible. So what the local church did was open this food kitchen in the church where people could go and eat food. And in this case, they didn't have to pray. They didn't have to do anything for the food. They could just go and get the food. This is a way in which the humanitarian principles could be respected for them. They also treat with dignity and respect, meant that the people has to queue, or they don't have to confess their sins or anything like that for the food. Right? Now let's talk about how from our UN humanitarian principles we can provide aid to the army, or we cannot. Like what could go wrong and what could go right.
Maybe there is no neutrality in conflict.
There is neutrality as humanitarians. If we are going to say we are 100% humanitarians, neutral. If a Russian soldier comes for food to you, you have to give it to them.
If they give for both armies, it is good. If not, then it's not neutrality.
So, John, do you have something to say? John Rose?
Yeah, sorry about that. Trying to get the unmute button on my phone on Zoom. I just wanted to ask a real quick question. With regard to churches, if a church is hosting, which a lot of churches do humanitarian work, but there is no requirement regarding adherence to their religion, it's listening to a sermon, taking communion, things along those lines, or whatever it might be. That is still fine, right? I mean, a church can act in a humanitarian as long as it's not coercive toward a philosophy or ideology.
Yes.
Right.
There are other gray areas, like for example, we had a discussion in one of the groups because as someone was trying to bring 3 pallets of Bibles to Ukraine, and for us as humanitarians, that sort of, it's a little bit like I personally, I am a spiritual person, and the direct reason I'm doing what I'm doing is my belief. and yet, I feel like, I understand why someone would want to bring Bibles into the conflict. However, according to the humanitarian principles, this actually, it's a little bit like proselytism. It's a little bit like it's very religious, and you don't know if you are going to be preying on people's vulnerabilities. So I think that, again, if you are there to support unconditionally, there is not going to be any issues. However, if this is going to be used to coerce people into joining your church, or if this is going to be used to prey on the emotional and spiritual vulnerabilities of people, that might be a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to verify that, it was, what you said was just right up the alley of what I assumed, but I wanted to make sure that, hey, since a lot of churches are the backbone of community humanitarian aid, that as long as it's done within the spirit of humanitarianism, everything is cool. The other one thing, since we were jumping into another point there, on neutrality, the other thing to consider is the Hippocratic Oath doctors take. It doesn't matter who comes along. I know I have my feelings. My feelings go out the door when I put on the humanitarian aid badge. But the same thing with, I would imagine, a physician, that, there is that sense of inherent neutrality, that somebody comes through the door with a gunshot wound, you treat them. You got to set the personal aside. Mm-hmm. But that's just my 2 cents on that bit. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah. So because I know the army is going to take a bigger portion here, I think I would like to go to the case 3 after this one. Lubomir, you have something to add to the conversation?
Yes. First of all, I just want to mention that I don't think we are going to face, any of these organizations are going to face a situation where we have a Ukrainian soldier and a Russian soldier, and we have to decide to treat them in a neutral way. Why? Because there is almost no contact with people in the occupied territories or with the Russian army, except when a Russian soldier is captured and therefore under the care of, supervision of, and supervision of the Ukrainian army. So I think that is a hypothetical that we're not going to face for a very long time here.
However, having your pictures taken with the army might be considered taking part in the conflict.
Therefore, I wanted to address that point, okay? And the point is, we do no harm unless it's considered that by providing the Ukrainian army any kind of technical assistance, which they could use to do what they're supposed to do, which is to repel the invasion, if that's considered harm, then I think none of these organizations that want to be effective in helping the Ukrainian army repel can meet that test.
So
secondly,
so it's not about the do no harm, it's about the not taking part in the conflict. So the moment
I understand that, but
the moment you are supporting the military, you are considered as taking part of a conflict.
So what I need for this seminar to be useful to us, okay? For this seminar to be useful to us, we need to talk about the context that we are in. And in the context that we are in, we cannot afford to be non-political and neutral. Yeah. Because most of the organizations, especially ours, is not just involved in providing syringes and hospital beds that will be used in a neutral way. We are involved in helping the Ukrainian army repel the attack, and to that extent help them survive by providing them the medical equipment that they need in order to survive when a mortar shell explodes right next to them and they are injured by shrapnel. Mm-hmm. Right? So if at the very outset, if the premise of this entire seminar is to be only helpful to organizations that can be seen as neutral, as for example, Amnesty International tried, or the International Red Cross tried to be neutral, then I think it's not very helpful to us. It's actually tone deaf, right? Because you can understand that the reaction in Ukraine to the way that Amnesty International conducted itself and the way the International Red Cross conducted itself has undermined their credibility entirely. And no organization that takes that neutral position in the way that they have can actually do anything in Ukraine because the credibility is gone in the
So-
context of what's happening.
I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna jump in. Dan, I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna jump in because I think you're making incredibly important points. And I want to underscore that the point of this presentation is not to say that we need to maintain neutrality. I can
Okay.
share an anecdote from one of our own partners who had taken photos with a friend of his in Ukrainian military holding weapons. It was shared on social media and they were denied for a grant. The point of having this conversation is unfortunately the UN does expect this kind of neutrality, which I completely wholeheartedly disagree with on a moral level. But
Right.
if we're going to think of ways that we can work around their particular system, it helps to have these things in mind.
I understand,
Nobody-
but that's why I'm asking this
Thank you, Ala.
presentation.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm-
so I
I'm
understand.
going to ask that this presentation focus away from the restrictions of the UN.
No,
when
the reason why I'm asking, the reason why I'm bringing these restrictions, I know it makes you uncomfortable. I can see that. And again, I personally stopped calling myself a humanitarian because I have been involved in Syria and I was part of the network of organizations that raised the human rights violations of Russia in the UN and had it vetoed in 2017. And I have PTSD from working from home, supporting in the ground people in Syria. So when people ask me, are you a humanitarian? I'm not a humanitarian, I'm an activist. Because I
Right.
do have a part in this conflict. And
Okay.
that's the reason I'm giving this conversation.
I
However,
understand.
to play the game, you have to know the rules.
Well, let's play the game. Let's play the game by understanding how to raise funds
Yes.
when we are
So-
clearly not neutral.
Yes.
And we are clearly political if we're supporting just one side in this invasion.
So you can still again take some of this stuff will not be necessarily useful for you. That maybe the
Okay.
last bit is going to be, so please bear with it. Just be
Okay,
aware of
all
it.
right.
Yes. When it comes to the work that we do, like I said, the Ukrainian context is incredibly complex, and I never imagined that I myself would be raising funds for drones or non-lethal military equipment. That's something that was insane in none of the other contexts where I have been, and I have been to several where I had to like get protective gear. Imagine that it would boil to this, but we are here, all of us. And so what we can do is consider, right? This is the game. How do we play it? We have an organization now that is at this point in Kherson, together with the government and supporting with the military in the humanitarian side of things. And they want to shout it through the roofs and they want to say that they're doing this. And we're having to ask them not to do this, because if this comes out to light, they will be denied grants. Now, again, it will depend on several things. For example, there are grants out there that will not require you this neutrality. There are organizations from, for example, diaspora organizations that actually are fundraising for organizations like yours to get army protective gear, to get them food, to get them stuff they need. Yes. So I think it's important that we recognize this and understand where in this whole ecosystem we fit. Yes, Josie?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that actually our organization is supporting people in occupied territories, many of which are trying to navigate through the crisis and trauma of even being accused of being sympathizers because of survival actions that they've had to make for themselves or their families. So there's just some overlap that has to be acknowledged, that it's not black and white. It's such a tough gray area, but many of our organizations are having to make decisions that fall under a category of how best to move forward in our work and still meet these some of these principles in a robust and healthy way to the best of our ability. And I wholeheartedly acknowledge and agree with your perspective, Diana, of needing to consider maybe moving into a place of activism as opposed to that term humanitarian. And each person's got to make the best decision for their organization, for themselves personally, that they can with the information that they have at the moment. But thank you for digging deeply into this, because it does present the opportunity to think through those things in a solid way.
I think that this is one of the trickiest things to navigate for the whole big funds and everything. This is the reason why I'm raising this issue, because what happens is, and I have organizations that do this very well. You know, there's organizations out there that are trying to remain neutral and do good work of it, and there's other organizations like Pritula Foundation who are literally advertising that they are raising funds for drones for the army, and they do that as well very successfully. And so it's going to be about what works for you best. And in this case, again, maybe understanding what might work, might not work, will depend part on the information that I'm delivering here about how the big funds work, about what what they are used to, and why you never see a humanitarian shaking a hand with Taliban, despite the fact that we all do it. You know, if you talk about Africa, if you talk about Afghanistan, if you talk about Syria, they all collaborate with the rebels and the army, because we need to remain operational, right? And so if we don't do it, it's going to be difficult for us. However, the question here is, how much of that do you make part of your fundraising strategy? You know, how much of that do you want to put to the front, and how much of that will actually be useful for you if you wanted to go the long run? There's other organizations out there who are actually not working, for example, with UN, but instead are just grassroots organizations that don't care, and they just go like this. And each organization is so unique. We actually have organizations that focus only on search and rescue, and they go from crisis to crisis just doing this. So yeah, thank you for raising this issue. This is precisely the reason why we're here. I hope you don't get put off by the fact that a lot of this is talking about the impartiality and this and that, because I also believe that's bullshit now, being where I am and having done the things that I've done, and supporting, working directly with the military administration and etc myself. But yeah, so I still have to have an obligation to share with you how it looks like on the other side of the fence, so that you can play with that around. And somebody else had something to say? Dave?
Yeah, I was just gonna, just a quick one. I don't want to delay it too much anymore, but just to respond to Lubomir as well, and sort of back you up, Diana. Just remember, we're all working on many different projects, and I understand that Lubomir's on one end of the spectrum, but for instance, we work with women and children, and we definitely can say that we're going to be neutral in conflict, and so just remember, there's a wide range of organizations on here, so this is still very useful for us. So that's all.
Yeah, so I hope nobody takes that criticism. I myself stopped calling myself a humanitarian, and I have had fallouts with other organizations because they understood that I'm not impartial. So this actually has a cost, and I absolutely bear no shame. And Help People, however, is impartial, and they do not my opinion does not represent their opinion. So yes, Roman.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting conversation. I would like to ask about church organizations, because I know that there are so many church humanitarian aid organizations, Christian one, like from different countries. And I don't know if it is good for us to cooperate with, a good idea for us to cooperate with them, or it looks like that we come to some church and it's not a good idea for grant history or something like this. So what would you recommend in this case? So it's also about UN human principles, but maybe from other side, to neutral NGO who work with children with like disabilities, IDPs, and so on.
Yeah, I think when it comes to crisis, it doesn't really matter what you do so long as it's ethical. And I think that asking churches to fund is not unethical. Like I said, if this money is being used to make people to do stuff or believe or whatever, yes, that is unethical. But if it's just funding, for example, evacuations, then there's no issue. And I think with us here, Natalia from Nova Ukraine, I think Nova Ukraine has had a very interesting strategy with churches. I don't know if Natalia, you would like to share a little bit of that. maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, so basically just churches, they people use a lot of their faith to motivate their pro-social behaviors and motivate their humanitarian action. And so it's a great opportunity for us to get funds if you can get churches to support. For example, the Jewish community donates a lot now, and I know that's part of the strategy of Nueva Ukraine depended on that. So it's really, there's no issue whatsoever so long as it's all very ethically implemented.
I would like to add one point. So before the war, there are two different types of organizations. One of them that are religious one, that it's like political youth organization, and the same religious youth organization. And the other part is NGO organization, like non-governmental, non-political, religion, and so on. So, and it was not good to cooperate with some religion, with some churches and so on, because it make you like under, how to say, it's like, looks like political or religion one. So that's why the question that after the war, maybe something changes, or in international level, it's not a problem. So you may cooperate with different churches. So it's good, but maybe not. And I have to know where it is. It could be.
Yes. So for example, and one very problematic example would be Scientology. I know that Scientology, for example, donates as well a lot of money, but they are shredded in a lot of drama when it comes to their work, because it's all very obscure, and there's a lot of accusations about abuse and about it's a sect. So I would say yes, try and be careful with the kind of partners that you get, and listen to these arguments that people tell you. However, inherently in itself is not a bad thing. It's just you have to be aware of the impartiality and try to remain impartial then during your work. Right, so I'm conscious of time. I think at the moment we would have 10 more minutes. I just wanted to share with you how it looks like very quickly. So because of how complex the humanitarian sector is, the core humanitarian standards were created, which are supposed to address some of those basic 4 principles, but it brings into action all the rest. I'm not going to talk about that. That's what the core humanitarian standards sphere in practice is. Sphere is a handbook written where you can read. It's kind of like a Bible for humanitarian work. It's a very, very good handbook that explains everything, how you can do it better, what the best practices are. They also have an online course that you can see here in this page, and they also have an app that you can download. And if you have any questions about how you can better report, about how to deal with evacuations better, etc., you can see here all that you have to consider, protection, etc. That's not going to happen. Sorry, guys. We have very few time now. We're going to move to disaster humanitarian response. And the humanitarian response. So a disaster response is part of a 3-step process that happens with every crisis, which is first disaster planning, when first responders have to get training to be able to cope with the disaster. Then the disaster happens, then disaster response, and then after this, disaster recovery. So the humanitarian response takes place in disaster response, and it's a coordinated effort from UN agencies and partners to mitigate disaster. And whether you are a UN partner or part of the UN or not, you will have to deal with this, because this is where, as we saw, most of the funding, most of the work is going to come. And even if you're a sub partner, which you can be, this sort of will have to do with this. You're a stakeholder, you have to do with this. So how that the humanitarian response looks like is through best practice. they have set up a cluster system, and this cluster system provides you with relevant information and a space to share knowledge and network with other organizations that are working in the same impact that you are. So it takes there's little time to talk, so you cannot participate very actively usually, but if you write in the chat, your query will be resolved in the news feeds. This is in the meetings, in the cluster meetings, which happen every fortnight or something like that, like very frequently, but I don't know exactly how frequently. Each cluster is unique as well, so it could be that the logistics cluster meets every 3 days or every week or every 2 weeks, and other clusters will meet every 3 weeks or every 4 days. They have best practice documents, they have trends and data, they have funding agendas as well, like for example, right now, very hot winterization. And to join the cluster meetings, you have to subscribe to the newsfeed. Then in the newsfeed, you will get the newsfeed from the previous sessions, and they will also invite you to the new sessions. The link is here. And what you will see when you go there is a menu with the clusters and a menu with the working groups, which you can also join. So working groups are groups specifically for certain things, and clusters are specifically for certain impact. So the clusters that you have now in the Ukraine humanitarian response are listed here in the PowerPoint, which you can see. There is one that is logistics, that's for evacuations, the most relevant. Any questions so far? No, okay. Right, so we were talking about UN OCHAS and UHF, or the Ukrainian Humanitarian Fund. The Ukrainian Humanitarian Fund was established in 2019, which is, the idea is that it's a pool of donations that is unmarked funds in prevention, you know, like to be able to action it whenever necessary and allocate it as, you know, in response to something that happened. And it is a pain to join, as you have heard already, Jessie said. And if you still would like to, the steps are here. Again, it's very restrictive, but it exists, just so you know. And what happens is you could actually, instead of joining as a partner, which is very restricted, you can become a sub-partner, which is an unofficial partner of a UN partner or secondary partner. What that means is that they will have the stuff and you will be implementing it. So they will get the funding, they will get, they will be responsible for they will be responsible for the reporting and the risk management, and you will be, you know, responsible for whatever you agree with them. This is in order to get to these partners, you have to network, you have to meet them, they have to know you. And one way in which we recommend you do that is to attending the cluster meetings. I'm still to meet the first organization that has made partner just from being in the cluster meetings, but I've only been to the logistic meeting so far. And it's never been necessary for me to attend them, but I know that other people recommend it. Are there any questions so far? So sub-partners, basically you are an unofficial partner of the UN by having an agreement with an organization that is an official partner, but they don't know.
I may say just one moment, if you don't mind. So now we start cooperate with partner of World Food Program, and so we are like implementing partner. So it is important to write in a agreement that we are will be implementing partner in OCHA also, because if not, you may do so much stuff, but all reports will have the partner of this organization. So it means that you have to be mentioned as an implementing partner in OCHA to have this history for the future.
Yeah, so how it works with UN partnerships is that once you are made partners once, it's a lot easier to be made partner of different projects and different UN organizations because you are already vetted. Now, if you are implementing partner, I would say that's like a specific characteristic, a specific a category. Sub partners are literally like the UN is not aware of them. And I'm going to give you an example. We had an organization that wanted to distribute food. And so the organization, because we already had the cards, the organization came to us and we decided to work with them. And they would not report to OCHA that we are the ones distributing. They would take all the responsibility and you know, try to, in a way, enable us to do our work, while they just have the contract and manage the whole bureaucracy side of it. An implementing partner, however, is as a secondary partner from UN that is, you know, the UN knows them and they know who they are and they understand that you know, these funds gave permission to this fund to implement, and so it's kind of like more transparent. And so, yeah. Are there any questions so far? All right, so I'm aware of the time. How are you all doing?
Great.
Yeah, would you guys still want to hear the final bits of it? Yeah, okay. Right, so abroad, instead of OCHA, you have the UNHCR, and this is the portal of UNHCR, and there you can find cluster data, trends, and agendas for funding. What I would say is try and go to the clusters and try and go to this page, because if you read the reports, sometimes the reports will say a fund has been open, or it will say as well, for example, what their priorities are, like, oh, we are noticing that people are going to need more heating, and so there's funding that's coming available for heating. And so if you continue to read this, you can also use this to fundraise. And when you are pitching for potential donors and potential organizations, you can say, according to the UN, right now the priority is heating and heaters because of this and that and that, and you can link it to it. And it gives weight to your grant proposal or your project proposal. Now, where to find funds? We talk about grants, and like I said, some grants will absolutely give a flying kite of if you are working or not with the military. Others will be a little bit more, you know, you have to be restricted and this and that. However, yeah, and you meet some partners in cluster meetings for UN and UNHF as well. You have the page now to apply, and you also have then UN partners. You can actually see the list of all UN partners if you go into the clusters, and if you go into like the UHF, you can all the mailing list is all public. You can see it there, and if you want to send them an email and pitch to them, feel free. But I would say it's maybe not as productive, because you really have to get to know them better. They have to be able to trust you instead of cold mailing, I would say. But who knows, anything maybe can work. I literally cannot shoot anything that what works for me wouldn't work for others. Then if you want to be able to find them, like I said, in Fiverr and other platforms, you can find these professional grant writers and grant specialists that will, in this particular case, the one that I found, identifies 3 grants and writes down the grant for you and everything for a reasonable price. There is another organization called Grantify in America. I know they are active only in America, that focuses on fundraising monthly for you. And it's like a whole team, hiring a whole team of fundraisers for something like $600 or something like that. And they like increase your funds raised to the millions, like they really do. So check about these sort of like platforms that could be of help for you as well. And are there any questions or any comments so far? Okay.
Just this is amazing. That's my only comment.
Okay, so thank you. And so when we go to funds, We can also get funds from private donors, and private donors come in all shapes and sizes. They can come from your network. They can come from events like that you organize. For example, we had a very successful a Colombian protest here in London, and we used that protest to raise hundreds, if not thousands. You can also use rewards campaigns, like for example, those campaigns like the ice bucket challenge or whatever. I don't know. You can use mailing lists as well. Social media is a big one, and then your own volunteers with time, because they know you, because they know the quality of work you do, they will start to raise funds for you if they have the time. So it is important that when they come to volunteer for you, part of the going back home is how are you going to remain active supporting us from home? How are you going to help us raise funds from home? And make sure that they have everything they need, PayPal's accounts, whatever it is that they need in order to be able to fundraise there and be taken seriously and send the money abroad. And we also have online fundraisers and crowdfunding, which a lot of you might be familiar with. It's been very successful over at Reddit, for example. They have raised millions and millions for military as well as civilian aid. So yeah. Anyone has anything to add here? Or anything?
Could you tell about international crowdfunding platforms? Maybe you know.
Yes. So there are
If you can send a list, so it will be nice.
So there are a few, and they all, work different for different people. I particularly have one that I love, but I hate as well because it always is a problem to get onboarded every year. And there are others that focus, for example, on local organizations that are charitable in their country but not abroad. So they sort of enable these organizations to raise funds that are tax deductible back in America and the UK. So I think it would be about each of the organizations trying to find out what your donors use, what your donors are more familiar with. I have people that raise funds, crowd funds through PayPal, and I have people that crowd funds only through crowdfunders, like this what's the name of that one? The one that everybody uses privately. I personally prefer the ones that are charitable, so I'm always on the lookout for charitable ones. But it's also very difficult if you're not a charity or not a charity registered in America or the UK.
Thank you.
We will talk about this as well, like when in another session. In another session, we'll go deeper. Does somebody else have any other comment, question? Something they want to add? Right, so another way of getting funds could be entrepreneuring. And this could be, for example, selling merchandise or partnering. Another way is social enterprising, which is more or less using your own business income. Either you create a social business or you use the funding from a business to do that. And not mentioned here is that a lot of partnerships come from private sector partnerships, where you find a specific organization and you tell them, okay, we want you to patronage us, we want you for us to be your cause, and this is why. And then they could go and have sort of this agreement of this is the one charity that we're going to help, and then fitting in within their corporate social responsibility plan. It could be very beneficial for them, and it could be beneficial for you. Sometimes this is done, for example, in the UK, you have like 1 or 2 days a year that you can volunteer for free. And so a lot of this patronage happens with like volunteers, it's like, hey, so if you volunteer for us, like you benefit, and then we're going to make sure that you get some of, you know, specific skills or the specific costs that you can advertise about. Planting trees is very famous. So companies that want to have like a more sustainable image, they would implement in their corporate social responsibility mandate to provide, you know, like helping the environment and this and that. I would say medical personnel has a lot of medical personnel and some psychological organizations as well, like have some of these agreements in place as well to provide volunteers. And it could be as well, like I said, if you build your relationships well, it could lead to donations if you engage your volunteers in fundraising. So in fundraising, I would say the most important thing is not, for example, the platform through which you are crowdfunding, but having ambassadors, having those people that believe in your cause and believe in what you're doing and know what you're doing, and that just go and advocate openly and constantly, you know, are constantly trying to find funds for what you're doing. Are there any questions so far? Any comments? Lubomir, how are you doing? Has this answered a few of your questions? Is it useful?
Sorry. I was slightly distracted the last couple of minutes
No worries. No, but
on the aid project. So could you ask your question again?
Yeah, no worries. Has this been like more useful than like
It has been, but I'm really looking forward to the next sessions where we can talk about how we raise funds within the context that we're working. I know that there are some other participants of the seminar that really are truly humanitarian. We can't count ourselves as such. And so for us, it is important to learn the techniques and the practices, the best practices of how we raise funds, given our context, which is to support, you know, the soldiers on the front lines. And that's a little bit different, I think, than maybe what some of the other aid agencies are typically used to.
No, I think there's no such thing as typical in the Ukrainian context. Again, I never imagined I'd be raising funds for like drones. like if you would have told me 3 years ago, Diana, we need you to raise funds for you know, drones, I'd be like, what? No, like I'm a humanitarian, you know, that's like no. But
the reason I'm saying it's not typical is before this invasion, I don't think there were very many I would say NGO organizations raising money for drones or other things like night scopes, night vision goggles, military medical kits.
Yeah, having to deal with directly with dealers.
And I think the reason is that there haven't been as many situations in the world where it has been this clear cut. Now, you worked in Syria, that was quite clear cut. Right?
It's different because it's an internal conflict. So I agree.
Right.
I agree with you. Like in the case of internal conflicts, usually it's very complex to go and say this is right, that is wrong. And as well, it's like it's in-house. It's like you don't have a lot of say in this. However, what's happening in Ukraine is that because the conflict was so clear-cut, an invasion, that we all understand it's, you know, to appropriate these lands, and you know, it especially for people that had already been familiar with the Russians and the way they work. It was very clear for us that no, you know, this is clearly, you know, there is clearly an aggression, and there is clearly a right side and a wrong side, as it were. So I think that that's as well that united the Republicans and Democrats, which is rare, and all the things, you know, all the governments in the world, including even some ex-partners of Russia. And so I think that understanding that context, like you say, is advantageous. My main concern for organizations like yours is that you might fall out through the gaps. Now,
and in fact, you put the nail on, you've exactly hit the point, because Most organizations that have existed previously, well, that have existed for a while and were involved in the humanitarian space and responding to many natural disasters or civil wars, have counted themselves and were able to count themselves as charitable, able to issue charitable receipts. And the tax regulations of various countries have not caught up to the current situation. In other words, the charitable status and the ability to issue charitable receipts is very much tied to the principles of humanitarian aid that you have outlined, which we fall outside of. And it was interesting because in the very first months of this invasion, we took the view that the most humanitarian thing we could do right now is to stop further advancement of Russian troops. And how do you do that? Is you provide the tools necessary for the Ukrainian army to stop the advancement of Russian troops so they don't bomb more homes, destroy more homes, cause more injuries. So that was a very humanitarian act, we thought, but it's not recognized as such in the tax code of Canada, the United States, various EU countries, and around the world. That's not recognized as charitable. So that's why I'm saying this is not typical. There haven't been many NGOs. So luckily, there are many humanitarian organizations, including in the Ukrainian community, as it happens, who have charitable status and who collect funds and are able to spend that funds to provide humanitarian and medical assistance. They, unfortunately, cannot provide non-lethal medical aid to armed units because of that charitable status. So therefore, new organizations had to be created, like our organization, Media Aid, to fill that gap. So it's that's why your seminar will be very, very helpful to us, I believe, as we go on.
So let me ask you this question. What type of organization is your organization?
We are not for profit, but without charitable status. So in other words, we are registered corporately for taxation purposes as a not-for-profit, which means, for example, just yesterday, we issued our 6-month audit, an audit conducted by an accounting firm, so that everyone can see we are not-for-profit. Every dollar that we collect goes to either buy equipment or ship equipment, no overhead whatsoever. All of our overhead, all of our operating expenses, we cover from our own pockets, volunteers. We just covered it out of pocket, right? So that's very unique, I suppose. We are not for profit from that perspective, but we can't issue charitable receipts because we don't fit within the strictures of what tax codes consider to be humanitarian and charitable.
So I personally believe that the humanitarian sector is not sustainable and is also, in that sense, not particularly useful. Now, mind you, again, I work with charities, I support charities, but I advocate for social entrepreneurship because it's just not sustainable that we have to deal as humanitarians with paradigms like you cannot pay your volunteers. You cannot pay people. You cannot do what you think is right. Like, for example, in this case, donating to the army. They will continue, like the charities will continue to abide by these principles. And maybe it's time for us to create an alternative reality for us, an alternative option for us. Now, I believe that, again, social enterprising is the solution, because then you can create in a way your own money or fundraise with your own donors, and then use this in whichever way you find more appropriate. The condition here is that you have to have a higher trust with your donors. Now, as independent, I have done this. I have created my own. I didn't create a charity because, again, charity increases your overheads, it increases your paperwork, and it also reduces your operability. If it were to increase the operability, I would say, yes, fantastic, let's do it. But it actually reduces my operability, because now I cannot even say opinions about what I think Russia is doing is wrong, right? So what I thought is, I'm just going to open a social enterprise. And what you do then is you manage the trust with the stakeholders. So you manage a relationship with the people that donate to you. And I guess you will have already a few donors that are very strong donors that are already like fundraising for you because they already donated everything they had. And these people are the people that are going to continue to, feed your own enterprise. Now, you can also consider how to use this as building patrimony for something else, like how to generate your own revenue. To give you an idea, selling t-shirts, right? A lot of organizations are doing this, and it's overwhelming the amount of t-shirts out there, but I'm still gonna use this as an example. Sorry, I'm very lazy. So as an example, if you go to Amazon, for example, you can just upload the designs on Amazon Merch and start printing your own shirts, and every shirt will give you 5 quid. Now, there are other solutions out there. There's auctions, there's this, there's that. You know, whatever works for you might not work for anyone else. I had someone else that was actually like the tags. You remember the airplane tags from the downed Sukhois. Well,
Yes.
this is how to get creative without having to you know, tie your opinion, without having to sacrifice your own moral standing. Because I think
We are very interested in that, Deanna, because we have tried a little bit of that. We've just had very hesitant forays into merchandise, for example, or trying to do auctions and other initiatives. So we are very particularly interested in your advice in that regard.
I will keep that in mind then, and I will give it a special place, because I love this. In fact, if you want to meet along with me, I could talk to you about social enterprising and ways to go about
Yes.
it. Like, because that's I love the topic. So feel free to drop me an email. I want to say thank you, everybody, for your patience. It's been very long. It's now 2 hours and 20 minutes, but we made it through. Thank you, Natalia, for joining us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Amy and Lubomir and Lesia and Bacchus and Alla. You guys are the last men standing.
By the way, we don't have direct emails yet. So if you can share with us, our emails are now in the chat, in the very long chat that you have.
Yeah.
But if I don't have your email, for example, Deanna, but I'm sure someone will put us in touch.
Okay, so my email, I'm gonna share it again. It's here
okay.
in the main page,
Let me write it down.
Diana@helppeople.org.ua.
And let me, did you put in the chat there? Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay, let me write it down. Hold on, keep it on the screen.
No worries. Is there anybody else that would like to share their own interests, their own concerns, their own experience, what they thought about the training?
I thought it was absolutely incredible, and I actually got a lot of messages saying how amazing it was. I think it's so helpful for us to know like both of these parameters, and for our organizations to try to think, okay, if we don't qualify for this fundraising option, maybe we can qualify for this option, and maybe we can collaborate with each other to try to really optimize on all of this. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's a lot of work. It's exhausting to do these kind of presentations. So I really, really appreciate it.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity, guys. I think, again, I'm so humbled, and you have no idea. I feel like I'm the least qualified of y'all, like sitting here, because you guys do such amazing work. But hopefully, you know, some of that knowledge I have with fundraising might be able to help you guys. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the next session. Next session, we're going to talk about donors specifically.
In 2 weeks, right? In 2 weeks, not next. 2 weeks, okay.
2 weeks, not next week, but the week after. We will talk about donors, and I actually already have the agenda. So let me spoil it for you. Let me see. Oh no, we have it in the online, no, Ala? It's in the
Yeah. It's in the slides, and I took it down. I took a screenshot of it, so we have it.
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm trying to access my.
Ala, are you the organizer?
Yes, I guess so.
What is your email then?
Let me put it in the chat.
Okay, thanks. And let's keep it open so we can write it down. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay. So, second workshop. Let me see if it interests you. We will talk about, you know, what have we done well so far, where is not going well. It's just donors. So it's just if you want to find like donations, donor personas, ambassadors and fundraising partnerships. We're going to talk about future pacing. So finding trends that, you know, you can use to talk with your donors. We'll talk a little bit about all of the stuff that we talked about today, but we're also going to talk about impact, cost, and charity efficiency, as well as our privileges as internationals, and then reflection, you know, about our skills and what we bring. And it's going to be a little bit lighter compared to this. Today's been literally, guys, like a speed course on humanitarian sector.
I'm sure that my wife will tell me next time I should go easier.
We are going to next is going to be a workshop, proper workshop. So instead of having me talk, we're going to get you to walk through the steps, you know, walk
Okay,
through the steps
perfect.
of donors. I do see that in the planning that we have, basically the last part is like business sponsorship. So if you want, what we could do is talk about business sponsorship and all of these before.
Sure, yes.
Okay, maybe can see if I can fit it on the next session.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm taking notes of that. Hold on.
I think it's quite coincidental that the acronym, your acronym UNCN, has UN in it.
Starts with UN, yeah.
I don't know whether you guys did that on purpose or not, but it gives you the, you know, well.
I don't think so.
It gives an impression.
Okay. Okay, so I've taken notes. I'm gonna amend the content for the next session so that it also includes creating your own, like, you know, social enterprise kind of thing. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely rest of your day. I have saved the presentation, and we will have to see where we share it.
Could I just ask a quick question? I know that at the beginning of the of all of this, there was an organization in the United States called the Ukrainian World HQ. Is that somehow related to you, or that entirely different?
Regarding me, I don't think it's related to us at all. I haven't been involved with them in any way.
Because they also styled themselves as being in the United States as an umbrella organization coordinating NGO. So I was just wondering whether you know, the Ukrainian World HQ turned into UNCN, but okay, that's fine.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody. And I hope to see you then next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.